Hi, I'm Erin. Are you considering maybe buying a van and maybe living in it full-time or part-time? With so many different ways to travel and live, it's super hard to pick the right way. But maybe we can help with that. I'm here today to tell you the reasons that we bought a van, other options that we considered, and a little bit about our background too. So buying a van is a super big deal. At least it definitely was for us, so I assume it is for others. There's a lot of things to consider. In this video, I'm going to cover these 6 things to consider when buying a travel vehicle. Number 1 is space, or the size of the vehicle. Number 2 is cost. Number 3 is comfort level, as in what creature comforts do you want/need. Number 4 is the amount of time that it takes to actually set up your living space. Are you willing to spend time setting it up, or do you just want to be able to park somewhere and go to sleep right away? Number 5 is stealth. Are you mostly going to be spending time at campsites, or do you need to be able to park in a neighborhood or city once in a while? And finally, number 6 is mobility. So, do you need to be able to go off-roading, or are you okay with sticking to flat ground? Okay, so in order to cover these topics, I think it would be super beneficial if we shared our journey with you guys so you can learn why we eventually settled on buying a van. Okay, so this is me, and this is my husband, Joey. But let me go back to 4 years ago when we first met. When I first started dating Joey, he was living in his truck. He did this for 3 reasons. Number 1, to save money. You don't have to pay rent if you live in a car, which is pretty cool. Number 2 was to focus on going to coding school. And number 3 was to not have to deal with roommates, which is kind of a big plus. So my parents weren't super happy that I was dating a guy that was living out of his car, but I told them to just give him a break. And plus, I really liked being able to go to the crag, aka the rock climbing spots, and to be able to rock climb and then just sleep near the crag at night. But his truck definitely had limits, like we couldn't sit up in bed, and that gets super annoying super fast. So the first thing that we learned was about space. We realized that we needed to be able to at least sit up in bed. A few months after that, Joey bought a pop-up camper. It was pretty cool, except that it was definitely a piece of junk. He bought it for like $200, and it was all rotted out and kind of gross. But that didn't really matter anyways because we didn't have it for long. So one day, I was pulling out of my driveway when a car in the road slammed into my car, which slammed into Joey's truck that had the pop-up topper on it. My car and Joey's pop-up topper were both totaled. So the second thing we learned from that experience was about cost. Basically, that you get what you pay for. And I think the accident was a blessing because that thing was nasty. So soon after that, Joey went ahead and bought a white painter's van. It's the kind of van that gets suspicious looks driving through a neighborhood or anywhere near a school. But he really did make the best out of it. He insulated it, he built a bed, he stuck some cabinets inside that he got from thrift stores. And it wasn't necessarily the fanciest build, but it was definitely enough to live in. We loved that van. We traveled so many places in that thing in all kinds of weather conditions, but it wasn't perfect. You could not stand up in it, and that turns out to be a super big deal. So, the third thing that we learned was about comfort. We realized that comfort is super important to us. We need to be able to stand up, and we also need better temperature control. With a van, you may be able to drive to warmer or cooler places, but Sometimes the weather is super unpredictable and you just need to be able to be comfortable and no matter what the situation. So about 6 months later, Joey and I moved into an apartment together, and it was a very sad and happy day because he had to sell the van in order to afford the deposit for our apartment. We lived in the apartment for about a year, and then we got engaged and we bought a house together. So for a while, every time we went camping, we just slept in the back of my Subaru Outback or we slept in a tent. Then about a year later, the pandemic hit. We decided that we were going to be spending a lot more time outdoors and we needed something just a little bit more substantial. So we bought this thing called a wilderness, which is sort of like this cool truck topper pop-up tent thing that was popular 20 or so years ago. Now it's like a collector's item, which we didn't know when we first got it. When we showed up at a campsite, at least one person would give us props on having a wilderness. But we mostly just got it because we wanted something that was easier to set up than a tent. Turns out, it's a lot harder to set up than a tent. We'd park, open up the back, take out some stuff so we could get inside, and then there was an elaborate process to unfold and pop up the tent, which involved a lot of rusted metal, warped canvas, and missing pieces. All in all, the process took about 30 minutes, which is not ideal when it's 11 p.m., you've been driving for 8 hours, and you are completely exhausted. So eventually, we decided, why not just test it out? We made a plan to camp in the wilderness for an entire week and try to work remotely the entire time. So we drove up to Wyoming and settled in for the next week of work. That night, it dumped snow, and I mean dumped snow. So then it was below freezing and snowy, and we couldn't rock climb, which is the entire reason that we went there in the first place. It was early September, so we did not expect snow. Turns out the wilderness is not good in snow, or rain, or snowy rain. We dealt with leaks the entire time and withstood freezing temperatures. We only survived because we had this little portable heater with us, and we used a lot of gas that week. So the fourth thing that we learned was around setup. We needed something that requires less setup and is waterproof and weatherproof and is less conspicuous so we can park anywhere. Don't get me wrong, I am like super thankful for that week because it's when we realized that it's finally time to commit. We'd spent enough time screwing around and we just needed to do the dang thing. But what exactly was the dang thing? We considered everything under the sun. Pop-up campers for the truck, truck toppers, tow-behind campers, pop-up tow-behind campers, cargo tow-behind, and of course, a van. So what we did next is we sat down and we prioritized what was a deal breaker and what could we live without. So we knew these things: space, cost, comfort, setup. Number 5, stealth. Since we planned on living in the van full time, we needed an inconspicuous vehicle that we could literally park anywhere and we would not have to worry about getting hassled. And finally, number 6, mobility. We were willing to sacrifice mobility, which means that we wouldn't be able to get to a handful of climbing areas or off-road campsites, which was okay. But it was kind of a sacrifice, especially in Colorado where we spent most of our time in these different vehicles, because sometimes all of the easy to access campsites are totally filled up and you kind of are forced to go to more obscure campsites. Plus, somewhere deep down inside of me, I knew that what I really wanted with all of my heart was a van. I loved Joey's old beat up painter's van so much. It was so cozy. So we made the decision to get a van, but what was the next step? Budgeting. If we combined our savings, we realized that we could afford to spend up to $17,000 without a loan. We figured after that, we could just incrementally buy things as we went along and we're building out the van, and we could just kind of figure it out as we went. We estimated that the build itself would cost about $10,000 on top of that, but we were so wrong with that estimate, but I'll get to that in a second. So after that, our options were basically to buy a brand new van and get a car loan, or to find a used van on the internet or at a dealership. We looked around at different options online and we saw a lot of already built out vans or partially built out vans. And we even thought about going that route. Like, it sounds kind of like a good deal. Like, you buy a van that's already built out and it's within your budget and you don't have to worry about building it out anymore. But we are so happy that we did not do that, because once we started building out our van, we realized just how much intricate detail actually goes into building it and how much potential there is for something to go wrong. And if something does actually go wrong, we want it to be our fault and not some random person on Craigslist. Plus, we wanted the ability to completely customize it exactly how we wanted it. Luckily, we kept looking around and we eventually found a used van at a dealership. So there are a few minor cosmetic things wrong with it, like the back brake light was busted, there's some hail damage, there is a dent or two, but overall, we think we got a pretty decent deal. And for those of you that care, we bought a 2014 Dodge ProMaster 3500 extended version for a total price of $16,800, which was just barely within our budget. Okay, so we got the van and we decided to build it out from scratch. There were a couple of other details that made it possible for us to do this. First of all, we both work full-time, so we have income, which means that we have money to put into building it out. Second of all, we both work remotely, thanks to the whole global pandemic thing, which means that we were able to drive out to Virginia. And why Virginia, you ask? Because it turns out that my in-laws have the dopest of the dope setups for building out a van. When I say dope, I mean it's because they live on a farm, so there's tons of space. My father-in-law has every tool that you can imagine and a complete wood shop and is generous enough to share with us. Also, my in-laws are super nice people and they're letting us crash with them while we build it out. Thank you, Jeff and Kathy. So that's our story. To summarize, I think that these are the things you should consider if you want to buy a travel vehicle. Oh, and remember how I said we underestimated the cost to build it out? So, we originally thought it would cost about 10 grand, and we're now at 15 grand. So we bought most of the main expensive items, but we still need to buy more wood and miscellaneous things. But we can break down the cost a little bit more when it's all said and done in a future video. Thanks for watching. We really hope that this helps anyone out there thinking about taking the plunge into living on the road, or anyone who wants to buy a travel vehicle. We hope that you can learn from our experiences and make the best decision for your unique needs. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit the like button below, and if you want to be notified of any future videos, also hit subscribe. Thank you guys.